The Manchester Chartist, Chapter 7. "Daniel, what art thou doing here?" Bess's husband stood by the fire in Mary Upton's kitchen, with young Daniel in his arms. It was turned 35 minutes past 8. Bess had just finished her shift in the mill, having returned to work at 3:30 following a meeting with Mr. Etherell. "I came to meet you and spend some time with our Daniel. I've heard you've had an unusual day according to what Mary here reckons." He smiled. "I'm fair knackered, lass, but I think I might have prospect for new work soon. There's an iron foundry being started in West Gorton." "There you are, Bess. Can you give your—" A breathless Irene Rose put her head around the door and laughed. "I was going to say, can you give your husband a message? But I see he's here. Good evening, Daniel." "Good evening, Miss Rose. What canst I do for you?" "My father would like to meet you. He sent me special to see if you were free tomorrow morning. Can you be at our home in Hardwick at 9:30? "Aye, Miss Rose." "Rose, why does thee feyther want to see Daniel?" "I'm not quite sure, Bess, but he was most insistent. I think it's to do with his ideas on housing. I think he wants to pick Daniel's brains." She pulled 2 pamphlets out of a basket. "Father asked me to give you these." Bess took them, and having glanced at one, passed it over to Daniel before studying the cover of the other. They were both works by Robert Owen, one of which she'd read. The pamphlet she passed over to her husband was entitled A New View of Society, and dated 1813, whilst the other, entitled Observations on the Effect of the Manufacturing System, was dated 1817. Much to Irene Rose's surprise, Bess said her father had a good taste in literature. She informed her she'd read the publications she'd passed on to Daniel, although she admitted she was unfamiliar with the second. "Have they read any of Owen's works?" she asked. The mill owner's daughter replied in the negative. "I think they should, Rose, especially his New Moral World. Owen's an inspiration, and his ideas on education aren't like thine and mine." In truth, Irene Rose's ideas on education were largely influenced by Bess's ideas, and Bess's were much influenced by those of Robert Owen. "Thank you for coming to see me, Daniel." Daniel stood with his cap in his hand, overawed by his surroundings. He'd made his way from Ancoats, threading his way through the lanes and alleyways, onto London Road. Eventually he'd reached the fine Georgian house fronting Hardwick Green, and entered through a side gate to reach the tradesman's entrance. Irene Rose was at work in the rear garden, digging and weeding. Upon seeing her father's visitor, she greeted him warmly. "You're early. Come this way, Daniel," she'd said, ushering him through an open set of French windows into a drawing-room, through which they passed into a wide varnished oak-lined passageway with a polished wood parquet floor, down which she conducted him to her father's library. "Sit down, Daniel, and you too, Irene Rose. I think this might be of interest to both of you." The mill owner smiled. "Now, Daniel, Bess tells me you're an expert on housing. What can you tell me?" Daniel shook his head. "Bess is likely imagining," he responded. "I know now about construction of such fine houses like this one." "I suppose not," Matthew replied. "But you do know about the houses you and other working people have to live in. Why do you think they're so badly constructed, and what needs to be done?" "It's all down to land ownership, Mr. Etherell. You see, a couple of builders spot a piece of vacant land. They arrange to lease it, maybe for 30 years, to build houses on to rent out. They build cheap, as cheap as they can, because after 30 years the land and everything on it reverts back to the landlord. If you look at houses round your mill, Mr. Etherell, you'll find some have narrow end of bricks showing and some will have long lengths showing. First lot are built better than second, 'cause walls are thicker, though neither aren't built right." "How do you mean, Daniel?" Irene Rose asked. "Them with narrow end of bricks showing have thicker walls, as I says, miss. Them with long sides showing are but narrow side thick. If they were built proper, walls would be 2 bricks placed parallel thick, with gap for air to circulate in between, with occasional brick put in endwise to bond them together, and provide strength. The mill owner realised Daniel knew his subject. The point is, builders don't build them right. They build them so when lease is up and they can no longer collect rents off poor tenants, owner at land don't benefit. You see, landlord would then rent 'em out himself, and builders would be out of pocket. For the same reason they doesn't keep 'em in good repair. That's one of the main reasons houses are so damp. You see, ventilation in 'em relies on draft-up chimney, and many on us can't afford to keep fire lit all the time, and without fire there's no draft, and without draft there's no ventilation. That's the be-all and end-all of it. Bess, Clara and Charlotte walked together to Mary Upton's to have their midday meal and look after their children's needs. Young Anna Sutcliffe, who they decided to take under their wing, accompanied them. As they approached Mary's small holding, Irene Rose, together with her father and Daniel, approached from the opposite direction in the Heatherose trap. Daniel carried a large basket containing a great pan, wrapped in cloths to retain the heat. "There you are, girls," Irene Rose greeted them. "I've brought some food for you all." "That's good of you, but you're spoiling us, Miss Rose," Clara protested. "We all need nourishment," Irene Rose retorted. She led the way into Mary's neat kitchen. Bess picked young Daniel up out of his wicker basket, and Clara did likewise with her baby daughter Emma. Both put them to the breast, and they began to suckle, whilst Clara's 2-year-old son Jonathan continued to play with Charlotte's twin daughters Rebecca and Rachel. They were soon joined by Anna. "Good afternoon, Mary. I brought company to meet you. Have you met my father?" "Aye, your father and me have met more than once, Miss Rose. Sit yourself down, Mr. Heathrow. It's good to see you again. You're always welcome here, then, Rose." Matthew smiled. Mary Upton had attended his wife and delivered Irene Rose safely into the world. "It's good to see you looking so well, Mary. It's been a long time since we last met. I won't sit down. Let the women be seated. They've been on their feet for the past 4.5 hours. There's room enough for all round my table. Can you bring them chairs over from fireside, Daniel? We'll all break bread together like good friends should." Irene Rose relieved Daniel of his burden and placed the pan at the centre of Mary's table, while Mary busied herself providing bowls and spoons for all. "My, that smells greatly, Miss Rose." "It's only rabbit stew," Irene Rose said with a laugh. She almost added that she'd obtained the rabbits from her regular supplier, and they'd been plump and were of high quality, but she wasn't sure if her father would understand. Her regular supplier, Martin Averthwaite, was a poacher, and she was sure the rabbits came off a neighbour's land. "God help us, Daniel. I knew things were bad, but not as bad as this. I could have shown you far worse, Mr. Heathrow." At Matthew's request, Daniel had shown the mill owner around some of the meaner lanes of Ancoats, and had then taken him across Great Ancoat Street, through a network of narrow alleyways and courts, into an area bounded by Store Street, Travis Street and London Road. The state of the lanes and houses here were even more wretched than those in Ancoats, the worst built on top of and down the steep slope of an irregular hill composed of clay descending into Store Street. Their narrow unpaved alleyways formed rough, irregular and unplanned drains, down which filthy streams of evilly smelling, rubbish-strewn and germ-infested thick slimy water trickled. Flies swarmed above in dense black clouds. The unfortunate inhabitants of the area were crowded into broken-down, dilapidated dwellings, some condemned to reside in obscure, damp, musty cellars, designed to contain the damp, not to provide human habitation. The structures defied all attempts by their tenants to preserve even a vestige of the cleanliness required to ensure a modicum of decent health. Each row of 30 or so houses had but one privy between them, and the surrounding area of each privy was a mess of human excrement, giving off the most putrid and vile essences. Daniel explained that most houses contained no more than 2 rooms, and some were home to 4 families and sometimes more, whilst few provided shelter to a single family. Often the inhabitants were shift workers, the day shift workers giving up their beds to the night shift workers, as and when required. Bess, love. Bess, Clara and Charlotte stopped in their tracks at the sound of Daniel's voice and turned towards him. What are they so excited about, Daniel? I've gotten a job, and I'm on more money than I could ever hope for. I start on Monday next. His wife looked up at him, her eyes narrowed, a frown on her face, not quite believing what he'd said. He grinned and put his arms around her. I'm going to be Deputy Building Superintendent for Mr. Etherow, he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. You won't have to work no more, Bess. I'm very pleased for thee, Daniel, she said quietly, but I'll decide whether I work or not. She broke away from him and gazed into his eyes. I've things to do myself, and need to keep me job at mill if I'm going to organise union and help me friends and comrades, as I promised myself and Rosa will. Bess, Charlotte said, you don't have to stay at mill on our account. Listen to what Daniel's... Bess shook her head, an obstinate look on her face. I've listened, but it don't alter facts. I need to work to organise, and that's what I'm determined to do, so they may all accept it. I'm a trade unionist and a Chartist, and I will not be deflected from my purpose. Bess sounded adamant. The only real way working people can guarantee to better themselves in this world is to better all of us together. On our own we stand no chance. We've now but toil and trouble afore us, no matter how good things might seem today.